So in my last tutorial, I showed you how to find commercial use clip art to use while you're digitizing. And before I show you how to import that clip art into your StitchArtist software to use for digitizing, I thought I would go ahead and show you some basics of the StitchArtist software so that when I say, for example, now create a running stitch, you know what I'm talking about. So first I'm going to go into my Brilliant software. I'm going to click on Create. That's my StitchArtist module. Now, I have StitchArtist Level 2. I don't even use all of the properties of my StitchArtist software. I mean, there's so much awesome stuff to use. I don't even use all of it. I'm just going to show you the things that I'm familiar with and the things that I use on a regular basis. There are buttons and functions that other people use that they can show you how to do in tutorials. This is just what I use on a regular basis. So over here you're going to see image. That's how you import an image into your software. I'm not using that right now. I'm just going to show you how to draw on the screen freehand. Again, if you heard in my last video, I've got a really bad sinus infection, so I probably sound a little more nasal than I usually do, and I'm super sorry if that's really annoying because it sure frustrates me. But anyway, so here are the two basic sets of buttons that you're going to use when you digitize. You see this one here says Draw, and look at these 10 buttons. Each of these buttons has a different function, and it's important for you to know what each of them does. This is the way that you tell your software what you're planning on doing. For example, you see right now it says draw with points. That's the one, oops, I'm running out of power. Hang on. The one that says draw with points, right there, that looks like 3 little dots in a row. That's the one you'll probably use most often. You're telling your stitch artist that you are going to draw a picture with your own fingers. You're going to plot your design as you like it in the field provided. Another one you want to look at is this one right here that says Magic Wand. That's what you hear referred to as auto digitizing. If you have a filled area and you click Magic Wand, that will fill it will draw an outline for you automatically, and it probably won't be right, and you really need to go in and tweak it to make it as good as possible. It's generally not considered good in the digitizing world when you supply a customer with an auto-digitized item. If you're doing it for your own use, knock yourself out, but you don't want to sell a design that you've auto-digitized using Magic Wand. It just isn't always totally accurate. It doesn't do it the best way possible. Another button you want to be familiar with in the draw pane is this one right here. The circle looks like a lasso. It says close and open outline. That's how, if you're going to draw a shape like a circle or a square or a rectangle, that's how you close up the outline to make it a closed shape. So those are the three. Those are not the only three. There's other ones, but those are the three that I'm really going to focus on this time. That's how you tell the software, it's like a command, what you're going to do. You are the boss. Now, if you look over here on this side, it says stitch. You can look at that as like a type. If you're going to freehand draw using the draw with points, you have to tell your stitch artist, are you going to draw a running stitch, just a single dot, 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 dot running stitch like you would have on a sewing machine, or are you going to do a nice satin stitch? You're the boss. You tell the software what to do. Here are some that I use a lot. There's run. That tells it to do a single. You can turn it into a bean stitch, a double stitch. There are lots of different options. This one next to it says satin border. That's what you're going to use if you're creating an applique. Another one I use a lot is Motif Run. That creates a stitch around the edge that's like in a shape, like a star or any kind of little shape or motif that you want around the edge. So let's just start out. Oh, and then this one right here is Fill. If you want to make a circle and you want it filled with just strictly embroidery, just a thread, a fill stitch, that's the one you would use for that. So let's start out with just those basics. And the way I learned these, you guys, I did read the manual for StitchArtist when I first got it, but I didn't really understand it. I'm not really a reading learner. I'm more of a visual learner. And all these things I'm going to show you, I learned strictly by clicking buttons. I just doodled on the page and clicked some buttons, and I just looked at what happened. And that's how I learned how to do what I do that I now sell every day on Etsy. Don't be afraid to just click buttons and see what happens. If you make a mistake, there's always undo. If you're on Windows, it's Control Z. There's these buttons up here in the top right there. It says undo. That's an undo. And right next to it is a redo. Don't be afraid to just click buttons and just mess around and see what you come up with. So I'm going to show you, first let's say I want to make a square and just a running stitch square. So I'm going to go up to draw, and I'm going to tell my software I want to draw with points. Okay, now you see I've started a design. Over here it says design. It knows that I've begun. And let's go over here and tell my software I want it to do a running stitch. So click on run. And now I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4. Then I'm going to go up here and I'm going to click right back in my green circle. And remember the close outline button I showed you? Click on that. And now you've got a closed outline. Now your software says, okay, you've got kind of this weird oblong shaped design. Well, now you're going to go in and you see these little circles that you made? Each of these circles is called a node. And when you click on it, you see his little handles. Do you see how the difference in my cursor, when I get near the handle, it shows me an arrow with a little ball behind it? That's telling me that I'm going to move this line. So I want you to just grab that and we're just practicing here. Grab that and just move it around. Do you see how the lines move in conjunction with one another? That is because this node, if you right click on it, it is in a curved function. That means that on either side of that circle, your lines are going to move conversely with one another. If you move one way, the other one's going to move the other way. Watch that again. It goes up. See how they move in accordance with one another. Now, if you right click on it and you choose cusp, then these handles are no longer working together. You see how that happens? Look. Now they move independently of one another. This one moves, and then that one moves. So depending on what kind of shape you're making, you can use either of those, curved or cusp. Now, since I want a square, and presumably I want all the sides straight, I'm going to right click again, and I'm using Windows. So if you're using Mac, I don't know if that is the same, but this is using Windows. If you right click on it again, you see line. Oh, now look. Now, going towards where I started, it makes it a straight line, and you can move it carefully to where it's perfectly straight. Now you go around to all the nodes in your design and choose line. Line. And I'm kind of a perfectionist, so I'm going to make each of mine perfect around the edges. Line. And finally, the last one, make that a line. Now you've got your square. It is all so beautiful. All of the edges are straight. And I'll tell you another thing you can do. If you click on that square, go over here to where it says Run, and you can choose the type of stitch that you want it to do. I can choose single, now it's on single, and the length. To give you a little newbie tip, I like to do mine at 2.0 when I'm doing single. I don't know why, that's just something I settled on, because it was not so long that it's like a basting stitch, but it's not so short that it takes forever and kind of bunches your fabric. So there's single. You can also choose double. That will make it go around your shape twice. Another popular stitch is bean. Bean stitch is like it's a triple stitch. It's used like in the final steps of a key fob or a snap tab or an in the hoop design that you need a good finishing sturdy stitch. Another little feature of your shape that you can look at now is, do you see this green bow tie that I'm dragging around? That shows you where your stitching is going to begin. And if you look at the red bow tie that's up and down, that shows you where your stitching is going to end. So I'm going to drag them both to the same spot. I'm going to go back over here and I'm going to select single. I'm going to go up here to where you see that needle pulling the thread. That's the stitch simulator. And I'm going to just push play. And I'm going to show you, this is how my square is going to stitch out. Watch this. Now you see how it started where I had the green bow tie, and it's just showing me where in my hoop, in my frame, that square is going to stitch out. Now another thing to look at as you're working down here, you see your hoop size, 7/16 by 7/16. I don't know what size that is. That's just, I don't know what it's set at. And the next set of numbers right here, 4 and 7/16 by 4 inches. That set of numbers shows me what size my design is. That's very important. If you're making a design, you want to make sure that it fits inside your hoop. So you always want to look at this selected size right here to make sure that you're not going over the edge of your hoop and you're not going to hit your hoop in any way. Another thing to look at is down here where it says stitches, 218. That's how many total stitches I have right now in what I have selected, which is my square. That's going to be 218 stitches for my square. So if you want to go on to a different type of, you can just play around. Let me center this. If you want to just play around with different types of stitches with your square, or whatever shape you've made, you can select it, and do you see how right here it has run selected? Well, let's go over to satin border, and look, now it's a satin square. If you select it, come over here, this is your properties pane right here. And this shows you the properties of whatever stitch type you have selected. So let's look at satin border. And here you see width. Right now it's at 3.5. That's a good starting point. If you have a larger shape and you don't have any small details you're trying to preserve, if you're doing an applique and you're trying to tack down some fabric, I highly suggest going up to like a 4. Or maybe 4.5. And you see how nice and thick that is. Everybody talks about thick satins, blah, blah, blah. That's like the cool thing now. If you go over to satin border, you see width 4.0 millimeters. I'll show you another thing another basic kind of function that I like to look at. Excuse me. Go up here, adjust the underlay properties. Now this is where your underlays are going to go. If you want a nice edge run under your satin stitch, 2.5 is okay. I mean, I do 2.5 or 2. It's just an edge run, so it's going to be under your satin stitches. Down here it says zigzag. The default density is 14. I find that way too close together. So I like to take mine up to 25 or 30. Okay. Now go back over here to your stitch simulator. It's always good to run your stitch simulator. Make sure that what you're seeing is going to stitch out right. And I'm going to show you, if you drag this rectangle, it shows you, here's your edge run. And you see how it gives you kind of an outline of where your satin stitches are going to go. The edge run is important. It may just look like, I don't know, extra thread, but the edge run and the diagonal zigzag stitches are underlays that help your satin stitch really float above your fabric. So they're important. You saw my edge run. Now it's going to do my 30-point diagonal zigzag. Now it's kind of, if you had an applique, this is where it would be tacking down your fabric really nicely. And it goes one way, and then it goes another. And then you'll see it starts going around the edge in a nice satin at whatever millimeter point you set it to do. And it's just that easy. I'll show you how to do an applique in a future tutorial. I'm just showing you now some of the stitch types that you can use. Now let's go up to try the third and final one. Up here where it says fill, click on that. Oh, look, now you just changed it from a satin to a fill. And if you go down here to stitches, you've done 20,987 stitches. That's a lot of stitches. But we're just practicing here. We're just playing around, so that's okay. If you go down over to fill, you see density 4.0, 4 point. That's fine. That's about what I use. Usually the default is fine. I'll show you some helpful tips in creating a good quality fill design in a future tutorial. Right now we're just kind of playing around. That fill right there, if you want to see what it's going to look like when it stitches out, once again, go up to Stitch Simulator and drag your little simulator rectangle and watch it. It's really cool the way they've set this up. There's your underlay. And now it's going the opposite direction. I mean, they really set up the default settings in StitchArtist so great. They set them up to really give you some thick quality underlays so that you don't have to worry about, what do I set the underlay at? What do I set the zigzag at? All that stuff. Because it really fills it up nicely to where your design is going to stitch out well. And you don't really have a lot of tweaking to do unless you just want to. I love doing a simulator because it shows me exactly what it's going to do. Gosh, that's a lot of stitches, isn't it? So there you go. So those are the three that I use most often. Gosh, I'm so nasally. Those are the three that I use most often: run, satin border, and fill. There are other ones that other stitch types that I may go into as I do more tutorials, but those are really the ones that you can use the most often to make the most designs. And I want you to make the most out of your software. So those are the stitch types I use most often and the ones that I really want you to get familiar with. And in the next tutorial, I'll be going into how to bring a design, a piece of clip art into your StitchArtist software and really start tracing around the edge and making a really cool finished product using those drawing tools and stitch type tools. You can follow my blog at www.stitchinghoney.com, and you can see some examples of the things that I sell every day on Etsy at designsbylittleb.etsy.com. I'll have those links in the in the description of this video, and I'll see you next time.